Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So in my final ranking the albums video of 2021, I'm going to be tackling the discography of the extreme progressive metal bands Between the Buried and Me from North Carolina, formed in the year 2000. This is a band whose makeup hasn't changed a huge amount in terms of band membership since about 2005. You have Tommy Rogers on vocals and keyboards. You also have Dan Briggs on bass, keyboards, Blake Richardson on drums, Paul Wagner on the guitar, and Dusty Waring on the rhythm guitar. And I can't think of many bands quite like Between the Buried and Me, even within the diverse kind of genre that progressive rock and progressive metal is. They are able to transition between extreme metal passages into sometimes other completely different styles, like swing, jazz, bit of blues maybe, and I can't think of many artists that do those transitions in quite the same way. Sometimes, often in the blink of an eye, you will be listening to extreme metal and then suddenly you get a bit of jazz thrown in here and there, and it's quite an extraordinary listening experience, listening to one Between the Buried and Me song, let alone a full album from them, which is often dense and really complex stuff. So I'm going to be tackling 10 studio albums here from this band. I'm going to be starting with my least favourite to my favourite. So starting from number 10, it will be all the way up to number 1. Do feel free to drop in the comments what your order of these albums would be. Otherwise, I'm going to crack on with this list. And as always, this is subjective. So our experiences with these bands is always different. You know, we always grow to like albums in different ways. So for those kind of reasons, we will have different orders. And I think that's just that's just the joy of sharing our love of these bands. Let's start with number 10, which is the self-titled debut album, which is very much kind of embedded in that kind of metalcore era, really. You can certainly hear the metalcore influence in their sound. And it's an album which, you know, I still kind of like. I wouldn't say it's one I would rush to listen to, but it's an album I still quite enjoy, with tracks like Arsonist, Useful Weapon, really aggressive riffing on this album quite often. But their introduction here, it also does show the beginnings of at times, lots of interesting musical changes in their music, which is a sign of what was to come in the later years of Between the Buried and Me. So that is the self-titled album, coming in at number 10. At number 9, I've put Automata II, which was the sort of sequel, obviously, to Automata 1 in the same year, 2018. This was a really short album, actually, almost kind of EP length kind of an album. And kind of partly for that reason, really, is what's so low down on my list. It does have one of my all-time Between the Buried and Me tracks on here, which is the proverbial Below, a 13-minute epic, which I do go back to very often. But the rest of this album, it doesn't do a huge amount for me. I mean, it still shows the eclectic talents of this band. But besides that, Automata 2 comes in low, I think, partly because it just doesn't have the same level of content as a lot of their other albums do. And number 8 is perhaps quite a controversial choice to be as low down as this at number 8. But when I was thinking about these albums, and which have more tracks that I enjoy and go back to, or more that I like to return to, it's the Paralyx II, which is number 8 here. Doesn't have as much that I really enjoy, and it's one of their longer form albums as well, which makes it all the more surprising that it's this low down. I don't know what it is with this album. It is still very dense, still complex, and there's still quite a lot I enjoy, like Extremophile Elite and Telos, which I think are amazing songs on this album. But for me, it drifts around sometimes into, and there's quite long, repetitive passages which don't do so much for me. You do get a bit more space at times this album, which is interesting, and a few instrumental, short instrumental tracks. But on the whole, this isn't an album I return to very much, and for that reason, I actually put it down number 8, which is surprisingly low, I think, for many Between the Buried and Me fans. Number 7 is going to be the Silent Circus. I actually really enjoy this album, and I think it's just perhaps a touch underrated in their discography. I know the first 2 albums are generally their least popular, but just kind of perhaps being a little kind of contrarian here in a way, I really do quite like a lot of the Silent Circus album. I think it's a bit of a dark horse. Yes, it's very aggressive like their debut album, but for me, there's a bit more on offer here. perhaps a touch more cohesiveness as well, and it has some great songs in it. I love Camilla Rhodes, Aesthetic, Destructo Spin, I think it is. There's just some great riffs. There's a lot of really cool riffs on this album. I think, being a bit of a sucker for good heavy guitar riffs, it has made its way up to number 7 on my list. Number 6 is the first Automata album, which came out in 2018. I really do like Automata 1, actually. I think it is actually perhaps of all their albums, it's possibly the most commercial as well, with things like Condemned to the Gallows on Millions, Blot, Yellow. It's definitely one of the more accessible albums, a little bit more simplistic in its approach, perhaps. But actually, that makes me like this album quite a bit. A lot of the songs are really memorable and really catchy. And particularly Condemned to the Gallows still has enough of Between the Buried and Me's kind of trademarks, time signature changes, and interesting diversions to make it. And actually, it's one of my all-time favourite Between the Buried and Me tracks, Condemned to the Gallows. I think it's pretty awesome. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to put that track on if you wanted me to throw on a Between the Buried and Me track just as a kind of a single song. I might well choose Condemned to the Gallows, because I think it still demonstrates how good they are, and it has some great moments in that track alone, and I think it's a great song. And Automata 1, actually, as a whole, I do kind of enjoy it more than the aforementioned albums on my list so far. Number 5 is Coma Ecliptic, an album which was kind of, quite late, I suppose, in the Between the Buried and Me career. It has their sort of longer form songs really here on display quite often. Slightly more cleaner, perhaps more progressive rock orientated, this album, than some of their others. It certainly has lots more of that cleaner ambient sound in it that we also hear a bit, I think, in the preceding album, the Paralyx II, and in the later Automata albums. It's certainly kind of, you can see the transition happening there between those two albums in a way. I really enjoy, I think the Coma Machine is a fantastic track, which has quite a memorable chorus to it, I think, and yet at the end it has just a fantastic climax, one of the best climaxes to Between the Buried and Me song that I certainly enjoy at the very end of that song, and it's a pretty good start to that album. I really like King Redeem, Queen Serene, and the diversity and the changes in that track. And one of my favourite shorter tracks of Between the Buried and Me is on this album. That is Option Oblivion, which I think is a really good song as well. And I think of all their albums, this one falls in the middle for me, because I really, really enjoy it. It perhaps isn't one of my all-time favourites, because I think at times I can get a little bit bored in this album, but I still think it has enough of really good Between the Buried and Me passages on offer to kind of keep me just about interested enough. It's a pretty awesome album. It's Coma Ecliptic. I'm going to take a swig of water. So number 4 on my list is Alaska. Perhaps this is quite high up, actually, and higher up than I might have expected to put this, but after lots of re-listens of these albums, Alaska has an appeal to me, which possibly is that it has quite a few kind of melodic moments in this album, which I really like. Selkie's The Endless Obsession is, for me, a classic Between the Buried and Me track, one of their earlier progressive takes as well. It's a great guitar solo at the end of that song, and again, I think my sort of love of guitar solos may be why this album is even a bit higher up, because I think it has some great solos on it. Backwards Marathon is a phenomenal song, which I love the live version of that as well, which you can watch I think on YouTube. And you've also got one of the shorter tracks. Sometimes they do really good shorter tracks Between the Buried and Me. They're not all just about the long complex tracks. I think they have the ability to write really good short songs as well. And this one's actually an instrumental. It's Medicine Wheel, and I really love that as kind of one of the better shorter kind of transitional tracks they have on their albums. Alaska overall for me is a really good and actually slightly underrated Between the Buried and Me, and it comes as high as 4 on my list. Now we're getting down to the 3 albums which I think are their masterpieces. I think all 3 of these albums are genuine masterpieces, and there is almost nothing between these 3 albums. And you'll, by elimination, know what is left in this discography. So coming in at number 3, I really, actually these 3 albums have been rotating since I've been thinking about doing this video. I have had each of these albums at number 1 at different times. So that is an indication of how much I've struggled with these 3 to decide what their final order would be. But number 3 is the Great Misdirect. Number 3 is the Great Misdirect. For me, just a wonderful, terrific demonstration of Between the Buried and Me in a kind of 60-minute nutshell, if you like. It has what I was just talking about. There are a couple of really good shorter Between the Buried and Me tracks on here, but also the longer progressive tracks are awesome too. Tracks like Fossil Genura, with really kind of playful piano moments that they stick in between the extreme aggression, which I just love. And then you also have Swim to the Moon, which might just be, I was going to say it's maybe my favourite all-time BT band track, because it has everything in that track, right through to the final massive breakdown at the end. But I mean, yeah, it's coming in at 3 just because the next 2 albums, I think I just prefer, just by tiniest of margins, that bit more. Coming in at 2 is the sequel, the second Colours album, which obviously means Colours 1 is going to be top here. But Colours 2, almost, this is where I think actually there's not really anything between these 2 albums, because they're both to me equally as good as one another. Having listened to both of these Colours albums again, there really isn't much I could draw on to separate the 2. I have had longer with the Colours album, though, than I have with Colours 2, which is perhaps what separates these, just that tiny margin, because there's been more time for me to warm to Colours. But I honestly don't think musically, and in terms of musicianship, that there's any difference really whatsoever in the diversity of these 2 albums and the quality. So Colours 2 comes in at number 2 with my favourite tracks. I'm going to name 3 here: Revolution in Limbo, Never Seen / Future Shock, and Bad Habits would probably be my 3 favourites on Colours 2. Colours 1 would be my 3 favourites on here: Informal Gluttony, Answer the Sky, and White Walls. And perhaps the reason that Colours 1 is my all-time favourite album, Colours 1 being number 1, is because I just prefer White Walls that bit more to Human as Hell. And I think that helped me towards just making that decision that Colours 1 would be my favourite Between the Buried and Me album of all time. So how would you rank these albums? Drop your order in the comments. Otherwise, I do hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings. Otherwise, it's goodbye from me. Do click like and subscribe if you like these kind of videos, music videos. I also do sci-fi, fantasy, horror coverage on this channel. Otherwise, take care everybody, and it's bye for now.